Trisha Fratello here with Creo Design. I'm here today to go over some instruction on how to make a farmhouse clock. So I am now teaching from home since we have a shelter-in-place order with our current virus situation. So this is all new to me, but I'm so excited and to be able to offer these kits to you since this is something I've wanted to do for quite some time. So you should have in your kit a piece of wood, a round piece of wood that has been stained and routed out the back. So as you can see here, with this smaller 18-inch clock, there are 2 notches. So these notches need to be faced upwards. So when you're choosing with the placement for your wood, you want to make sure one of those notches are pointing up, because that's going to be where you're going to be hanging it, your hook. So I want my lines on my wood to go side by side. So this notch is going to be upward instead of, you don't want it to be facing downward. So when I'm placing my wood down, I'm going to have it go this way. And then you'll also have a stencil. And a lot of you will have it personalized with your last name and an established date. That's pretty popular. Today I am going to do a tree of life. I have wanted this clock for quite some time, and believe it or not, I've made a lot of these clocks, but I've never made one for myself. We got a clock for our wedding, like a farmhouse style clock, as a gift on our wedding day, and I have always just really, I've liked it, but it's just time to let it go. And I'm gonna make my own personalized farmhouse clock. I'm so excited. So, okay, so you have your stencil. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be, so it should fit pretty securely on there. But first, I am going to be placing a ring. A circle in the middle of my circle, and I am doing this because I want to paint a ring around that goes around the border of my clock here. So I'm going to be using chalk paint to do this. Oops. So I have a little dot that I just want to get centered here. And then I'm going to take a ruler. So if you can grab a ruler and some scissors, I think that's about the only thing you'll need at home. And you can just measure, it should be just under 4 inches all the way around. Each piece of wood is a little bit different in size, but yeah, looks like this is it's nice and even. So I'm going to press that down and grab some paint. This is a chalk paint, and I only use this when I am painting the border of my clock. I don't use it normally on stencils because it gets really thick and sometimes it will pill up with the stencil. So this stuff is really thick. So in your kit you should have some of these sponges, and when I am painting this, I just make sure I am swiping outward. These sponges collect a lot of paint. You can hold it kind of towards the bottom to give it more stability here. And the reason why I'm painting outward is because it creates this nice line. if you're painting like this, it doesn't, your paint kind of ends up going around the edges here. But the swipe motion is great in creating that crisp line along the edges here. And this paint dries super quick. This chalk paint. Okay, I have applied the second coat and I am going to place a blow dryer to it, but I'm gonna make sure when I am blow drying to make sure the temperature is on cold. So I'm gonna make sure I hold down the cold shot. It's just sometimes the paint, especially when you're doing a stencil and you use a blow dryer, the paint can fuse together with the stencil. And when you pull up the stencil, it could end up pulling up your paint. So just make sure when you're using the blow dryer that it's always on cold, and not just on cold, but you hold down the cold shot because you don't want the temperature to be warm at all. Okay, so in your kit, in your little baggie, you should all have a little toothpick. And this toothpick is nice because it can pick up your stencil if you stab it in there. So there you have it. You have it nice, crisp circle. Isn't that cool? Okay. Now we're ready for our stencil. Normally in my workshops, I have the participants weed their own stencil. These are cut for my my big cutting machine downstairs. I used to use a Cricut, but the Cricut just wasn't cutting this wide. So I now have, it's called a US cutter. So it now cuts it all in one piece, and that's super nice. And so yeah, I've weeded in your kit, I've weeded the stencil and placed a piece of transfer tape over the top of that, of each stencil. And the transfer tape is clear. It just helps when after we take off the back paper, it helps hold everything together so we can place it onto your board, and then after it's placed, we can peel off the transfer tape. So first we are going to work on taking off the back paper off of our stencil. And when I'm doing this, I do like a roll, like a fold and roll type of motion. So you don't want to touch any of this blue except for the very corner to hold it down. So when you notice something starting to come up, like instinctual, you'll just like want to like push it back down. Try to hold back on doing that and just roll. So if you see something coming up, and I don't see anything coming up right now, but you will, especially once it comes to the little pieces when I get to the tree. See, I'm just rolling. And just like tight folds. I do this because the pieces tend to want to flap back down the tighter the fold I do. But when I see something starting to come up, I'll just push it back down with the paper so it's on there tighter, and then I'll roll again. So I'm going to hold the edge. I'll see how that is starting to come up right there, that little piece. I'm just gonna fold that paper back down and push down on it so it grabs, so the transfer tape grabs it again. And that's coming up too. I'm not able to do such a tight fold because I had to hold it down the edge there. There we go. Okay. look back at my lines on my clock and make sure they're side to side. And I've got my clock mechanism, my little rainbow piece pointing directly up. So this needs to be turned this way because I want my line side to side. And I want to be sure that they're directly side to side and that this is directly pointed up. So my stencil is still, I'm going to end up, like the sticky side is still up. So when I turn it, it's going to attach to my board. So before applying pressure to my stencil, I want to be sure it's placed in the correct place, because once it's down, it's pretty much down. You're not getting that thing back up until until after you paint it. So you can like hover over it. Just don't set it all the way down until you know it's where you want it. And you can take a ruler to it. I normally just eyeball it. I just want to be sure that my 12 o'clock is at the top here. And my lines are straight. And I'm gonna just set it down for a second and just take a peek to be sure that my little rainbow hook in the back where my clock mechanism is gonna go is pointed up. Pretty good about that. So I'm gonna go ahead and push it down. Now you can take the transfer tape off. And you can do the same type of roll. You don't have to be as careful. And now you can touch the blue. And you know what? And some people really like to use a ruler if there's any like bubbles or anything. So that's nice to do. So let's just do that. You can also use a credit card. If there are bubbles, just kind of move them to the center. And you can do that after your transfer tape comes off. So your transfer tape was there to hold everything into place. Like keep your dots of your I's, the middles of your E's and O and loopy-loops all in place. Come up a little bit, so I'm going to push that down a little bit more. Sometimes the stain is more oily than others, and I love this chalk paint because when I'm pulling it up I can already see that it's distressing a little bit. And if you don't like that distressed look, you can always touch it up after you pull up your stencil. right here. Okay, so now you'll just want to smooth everything out so there are no bubbles. And if there are bubbles, like I said, just move them to an area where you don't have a stencil. And since this, so you can see right here, I had a knot, and I think it just ended up being really grainy right there. So my stencil just really didn't want to stick to that. And sometimes that will happen. So like I said, I'm glad it's happening right now. Okay. So as you can see, everything else stuck very nicely. So on this stencil especially, I'm gonna make sure I'm doing these coats extremely light, because it doesn't have a great seal. Okay. You want to be sure that you could be extra careful and not paint around the edges, but I like to just create a barrier. So where the stencil that had your circle on it, you can just cut around this. The edge. You can put some of these little pieces around it, because right now we're just trying to protect our blue from any of the black paint. So those of you that aren't making clocks and you're making something else, the clocks are the hardest, definitely. So you guys can fast forward through some of this if you need to. But if you aren't making clocks, you can still create a barrier if you don't think the stencil creates a large enough barrier. Paint the Roman numerals black because my ticker is black. And then I want to paint the tree white. So you'll have a sponge for each color. You don't want to wet your sponge and then switch colors. If you do wet your sponge, make sure you wring it out really well with a paper towel, because you don't want to thin your paint out to where it's going to catch any of the grooves in the wood and run. So you want to prevent as little bleeding as possible. And with that being said, you want to do extra light coats. So I put a tiny bit on there, and even though I put a tiny bit on there, I'm still gonna dab it on the blue off to the side, because I want the first coat to be extra light. There's grooves in this wood, and no matter what, there might be a little bit of bleeding, but we want it as crisp as possible. So you can just dab. You don't want to swipe, because that will push the paint under your stencil. So dab, dab, dab. The lighter the coat, the better. See how I'm picking up my paint where it's a little bit heavy? And then bringing it over. And then once you've run out of paint, you can grab a little bit more and do that same thing. Just dab it off to the side first, and then dab your Roman numerals and your dots. Just make sure that you've created a good barrier for yourself. And with this black, you'll probably only need one coat with the black over the white or the eggshell blue. Because it's such a drastic difference in color tones here. It's really close to the tree, so I was just being extra cautious right there, because that's going to be painted white, that tree. So I don't know about you guys, but this has been, it's been so necessary to find time for play and creativity, and that's what I'm hoping to do. That's my whole intention with my business, is to bring creativity and play to adults, because we don't do that enough in our culture. In our corporate America, we tend to work and no play, and we also don't use our fine motor skills as much as our ancestors did, besides typing and swiping. So we're not making things with our hands as much, and it just feels so good to make something and to have that sense of accomplishment. Being a stay-at-home mom, I don't necessarily get that feeling every day. I feel like everything I'm working towards every day just gets undone. So to be able to have this as an escape feels so good to me. So I hope that by me offering these kits to you and these instructions, I'm helping you reclaim that creativity and you find as much joy in it as I do. Okay, so I'm gonna blow dry. All right, so there's still some wet spots, but that is actually, I can see it's mostly on the vinyl. So I'm gonna go ahead and just apply some of these extra spots where I see might need some. There wasn't a lot. So I'm gonna blow dry it one more time. So now I'm gonna work on my tree. While that dries all the way, I just didn't, I wanted it to be somewhat dry so I didn't end up putting my hand in it. So I'm going to use white paint here. There's a little clump right there. So I'm going to use a fresh sponge. And just really dab lightly on this one. And I'll probably need more than one coat. because it's directly on wood. But I am going to make sure these coats are extra light, because the barrier isn't completely sealed. And normally, like I said, normally even on the stained wood, it seals pretty nicely, but sometimes you just get like a weird piece of wood where it's grainy, and then the stain, when you apply stain to it, it makes it oily. So then the stain doesn't stick as, I mean, the vinyl doesn't stick as well. It makes it just oily. The stain makes it oily. So as you can see, that is super translucent. I'm gonna do another coat. One or there might be even 3 coats, but I don't care. I'm gonna just make sure these are super light coats. This is so fun though. I love dabbing. So I noticed, since I did such light coats, I noticed that it was drying. It had already dried by the time I made my way around. So I started going over it again. So I'm gonna go ahead and blow dry it now. Okay, if you see that it's still wet, see, I was like dabbing a lot in that area, so I'm just gonna wipe that off because that is not a part of my stencil, but it's gonna take forever to dry. And I'm impatient, so. We don't really want there to be lots of wet spots as we're pulling it up because it can splatter. I'm taking off my border first, and I love how it's pulling up some of the chalk paint. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Oh yeah, it's looking awesome. It's the big reveal. I love it. Oh, I love my roots. So pretty. And you can also use your toothpick. I think mine blew away. Oh, there it is. To get under some things. Or get in the middles of things. Like the middles of my trees. Middles of my Roman numerals. Okay, so I've got a few spots where I just want to kind of like outline it a little bit better, like make the lines a little bit more crisp, and you can do that with the edge of your toothpick here. Let's see. But so far it looks pretty good. I'm loving it. I didn't really, I mean, there's some bleeding, but I think it looks so good because it's so rustic looking. Love it. There's a little spots, and I wanted to touch up with a little paintbrush. So you each should have a little tiny paintbrush if you wanted to. I just had a little bit of white that got on, I don't know how that happened, it got on my black right there. Okay. So now we are going to put the clock mechanism on. And you should have your clock mechanism. These are so fine and they are not very sturdy, so be very careful not to bend them. They can't weigh very much, otherwise they won't tick. So be careful. There's a very fine piece of plastic over the top of these. So just be careful when you're peeling that off, that you don't bend your tickers, your hands to your clock. And this, like I said before, this is the hook that you're going to use to hang it up on the wall. And that will just go, you can place that in the back of your clock. And actually you can use this washer if you want. And that can go on your clock mechanism first before placing it right there. And then the instructions are on the back of your clock mechanism. So it says to now attach the nut. You have another washer. And then you can attach the nut. And you will need a wrench to do this. And this size, let's see if I could figure out how to read this. It's 11 millimeters. 11 millimeter wrench. So I just used my fingers for most of it and then tightened it. Then it says you need to put the hour hand on first. So when you're putting it on, you need to make sure that they're both pointed towards 12 o'clock. So you push it on, it doesn't go all the way on. Just push it on until it's secure. And then you will push on your hour hand. And you know that the 24-inch clock, the tickers are a little bit different. So you may need to just read the instructions on the back of that. They all kind of fit on differently. I think with the larger clocks, the larger hands, you don't have this little button that goes on at the very end. And we've got a clock. You set the time from the back. And by just twisting this little twister thing, and you'll need a battery, and it will work, and then you can just set your time. So yeah, I enjoyed making this clock. Yay, now I finally get my own on my wall. I'm so excited, and I love trees, so this is awesome. So yeah, email me if you have any questions or message me on Facebook or Instagram. If you're in a bind, let me know. I'm happy to help always. I hope you guys had so much fun. If you want to book a private party with your family, I can now ship supplies around the US. So that's a fun way to connect. And yeah, I hope to see you at a Sip and Craft workshop, or let me know if you want to order more macrame kits, succulent wreaths, or string art, or more wood signs. Have a wonderful shelter in place, and I hope I get to see y'all soon.